Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Just a friendly reminder, we do record all of our webinars, including today's. Today's webinar title is Forecasting for Federal Grants, presented by Diane Leonard. My name is Alyssa Atkins, and I am the Training and Development Coordinator for the Native Learning Center, and today I will be your webinar facilitator. Just a quick disclaimer, this webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. Also displayed here is our copyright infringement law. This is just a friendly reminder that the webinar presentation materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to interact during the presentation. If you look at the top of your screen, you should see your hand. With that hand, you can raise hand, agree, disagree, applaud, laugh, or step away. Now your screen should look similar to this graphic shown. At the very bottom, you're going to see files. Here you will find any handouts or appendix items included in today's presentation. Please feel free to download a copy for yourself. Simply click the item you would like to download and click the arrow pointing downwards to download and save onto your device. Once the item is downloaded, it should appear in your device's download section. The second box labeled web links is where you will find our survey about today's webinar, along with the link to join our email list and any other links that will be seen throughout today's presentation. Finally, to the right of the screen, we have a chat box available. This is how you will communicate with instructor and NLC staff. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to interact by using the chat box. Simply type your message and hit enter or click that up arrow icon button to submit. Tech support issues should also be submitted here. Know that most can be solved by exiting and re-entering the meeting room. Let's all try out the chat box together now by typing in your name, where you're joining us from, and your tribal affiliation. And with that, I am proud to present Diane Leonard.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join me for forecasting for state and federal grants. I love talking about all things grants, and I recognize some of your names from some of the webinars that we've done in recent months. So great to see you again. Thanks for joining us for another fantastic conversation about all things grants. And for those of you that have not been in one of our recent grant sessions that I've delivered, thrilled to have you joining us today. And I'll take just a brief moment and introduce myself. So I am Diane Leonard. I am a grant professional certified and an approved trainer for the Grant Professionals Association. And what those two things mean is that I love talking about all things best practices as it relates to grants, whether foundation, state, or like in today's case, federal dollars. And actually, I started in my career on the other side of the grant seeking equation. I was a grant maker for a statewide foundation in Michigan. But I've been on the grant seeking side now for 20 years. Oh, how time flies when you're having fun writing grants and securing money for fantastic organizations and missions. So, this work that we're talking about today, forecasting for federal grants, is not theoretical work for me. This is practical work. It's what my writing team and I are doing every day, and part of how we're helping to ensure that our clients are securing grant awards as well. So, really, really hands on tactical information today. And in fact, I'm going to be asking you to do a little bit of digging on your own live. And so I'll be directing you to a few sites where I'm going to ask for you to practice some of what we're talking about today so that you can see what initial questions you might have. One other detail about me. Our team is really focused on avoiding burnout. The grant writing profession is one of the highest professions in terms of a burnout rate. And so I want to do everything we can to avoid that, not to let grants stress us out. For me, that means running, or when it's as snowy as it is in far, far, far upstate New York today, indoor cycling is a good replacement, and one good cup of fresh coffee. So, good news, both those things happen today. So, I'm feeling fueled. ready to go. And I see we've got folks letting us know where they're joining from today. If you would also be willing to share what is fueling your work, it could be about movement or beverages or another form of self care, maybe walking the dog, recent books, or maybe the mission of the work that you're focused on. No right or wrong answer here. But if you're willing to share in the chat box underneath my question, what is fueling your work today? I would love to hear. And I'll let you type that in, see what we've got fueling the group today. What I have on the screen right now is our agenda. We've got 90 minutes together to talk about forecasting. And so we're going to look at the broad stroke best practices of grant seeking and talk about where does forecasting fit and walk through the mechanics of actually forecasting grants, finding opportunities that we could look at and prepare for. Now, I do have a formal Q&A at the end. I always have a slide where I'll ask you if there's any remaining questions that you'd like to have answered before we wrap up for the day. But please, I strongly encourage you to type any questions into the chat box as they arise. I don't want to ask you to hold your questions in a parking lot. I'm watching the chat box the entire time that we're here today. And if there's a way that I can answer your questions in the moment, on that very specific slide, or maybe even on the next slide, I would love to do it instead of having you wait till the end. So, not required, but an option for you. So, a pretty packed webinar session for us together. So, let's dig in. The grant life cycle that I've shown on the screen is showing us the 5 areas of best practices for grants of all shapes and sizes. Foundation, city, county, state, or federal, our grant life cycle best practice elements are the same. Now, some of you may have heard me talk about the life cycle before, but for others, this idea may be new. So let's walk through it quickly together. The grant life cycle, the idea, actually, it struck me how similar that feels to some of those environmental, the biology cycles that we hear about. I was helping my daughter study for living environment the other day. We were talking about similar things in terms of an ongoing cycle. And so, this idea is that we are going to read our cycle like we would a clock on the wall, and we're going to start at our 12 o'clock position. We always want to start by talking about readiness. Are we technically eligible, and what can we do to set ourselves up to be as competitive as possible? That's a broad conversation in an organization, but also an individual application conversation each and every time, especially for federal dollars. So when we assess our readiness and we think we're ready to go after a specific type of grant, we would then do our research work. So we're moving clockwise around our circle to that second element of research. And with research, we're trying to find opportunities that our organization would be the most competitively positioned to apply for. Once we have found an opportunity that we are interested in applying for, we will continue around clockwise around our life cycle circle and we'll end up at our third R. We see relationships. This doesn't necessarily mean we're sitting down having coffee face to face or going out for meals with a funder. What it means is that we are building a professional relationship, having interaction maybe over email, via phone, maybe at funder forums or conferences, but starting to build some professional understanding and trust between your organization and that of a grant maker. Those 3 things, that's a lot that's happening before we ever sit down to write. As we move around our life cycle position clockwise, we're now at about the 7 o'clock position on a clock face, and we see we have writing. Writing is the biggest part of our grant work. So having it in that 4th position is not saying it is a small portion or that it's proportionally of our time, as you could say, like the way that the clock is split out. But the idea is that these 3 items we saw before, readiness, research, and relationships, need to be done in advance so that our writing time and our writing effort is as competitive as possible. Then once our writing is done, the grant is submitted, we've waited and waited and waited, we finally, ideally, will hear that we have received a grant award. which would allow us to move on to that fifth and final element in our grant life cycle, which is reporting. So, reporting, we could also say, is grant management, being good stewards of grant funding, implementing the project, doing what we said we would, when we said we would, how we said we would, and reporting back to the grant maker. Before, as that final arrow indicates, doing it all over again. So, 5 main elements that we see in each and every type of grant that we're going to consider. Today, of course, we're talking about federal grants. What I would love to hear from you, please let me know in the chat box where in the grant life cycle, within these 5 elements that you can see on your screen, where do you think that forecasting activities for government grants is taking place? Go ahead and let me know, please, in the chat box, where within this life cycle do you think that forecasting activities are taking place? Let's see. Uh, Research, readiness. Another vote for readiness. All right. It seems like if you're having any trouble with the slides, I'd maybe encourage you to refresh your browser, maybe to re-enter the webinar so that the slides might reappear in that upper left-hand corner. All right, so we've got a few different votes. Another one coming in for research. Well, the reality is forecasting is happening throughout the life cycle. As organizations become more comfortable with what the activities of forecasting are, they can be taking place pretty much at any time in the grant process because there's a few things at play here. We might learn something while writing a specific application that's going to help clue us in for the next grant, forecasting for the future. So while you're right, most of the time, if we are in a space where we say, I'm trying to figure out what federal grant I might apply for in the next 12 months or the next 18 months, you're right. We're usually thinking about it and we're in that readiness and research space. But you want to keep your forecasting eyes open at all times because you just never know where in a conversation or a process you're going to learn a nugget that will help you understand something about a future application. So, as we think about what forecasting really means, the fact that it is happening all the time, I want to actually talk about why. Why do we spend time forecasting grants? Forecasting is really the idea, as we see there's this long telescope here, this long looking glass, helping us to see far, far away. The idea of forecasting grants is that we will identify opportunities that we are pretty certain we want to apply for. We think as an organization we would want to put in the time and effort to create an application for. And we're trying to identify them before they ever open to receive an application. The reason why we want to focus on forecasting, especially when we're talking about federal grants, I'd love to hear your ideas, what your guess might be. How many hours on average does it take for an organization to put together a federal grant? Some of you may know this answer already. What is the average number of hours that it takes for an organization to put together and submit a federal grant? Go ahead. No judgment on your guess. Maybe you want to do a Price is Right style. I'm pretty sure, though, it's more than 1 hour if you're trying to come in at the lowest bid here. But how many hours on average do you think it takes? All right, we've got a wide range of answers, some 72, 80. Oh, wow, right? Could it take over 1,000 hours? It is a huge task. On average, a federal grant will take 100 hours. Now, that's on average. We know there's some that are less, there are some that are way more. But if you think about what 100 hours of people effort in your organization looks like, that's a pretty big commitment when often what you're really focused on is delivering awesome programs and services. So we want to forecast grants, regardless of which agency we might be interested in, because what we're trying to do is give ourselves a head start. We want to give ourselves a competitive advantage. I am a proud cross country mom. Actually, I've been a cross country runner myself since I was in middle school. No longer in middle school, still now I just run for fun. So please, I understand not everyone's a runner, but please, if you could humor me with a running analogy. So recently, before the snow, I was at a cross country meet and I was standing there watching 15 different schools line up on the starting line. And so they're stretched out over the entire athletic field, getting ready for the starter to drop the flag and for them to go. And as I watched them, I was thinking about all the people that are coming in, thinking about applying for a federal grant. And so what happens? Well, the application opens in grants.gov, the deadline is released, and everyone, just like the runners on those lines at that cross country meet, takes off. Everyone's excited, everyone's going to put in their best effort. There will only be one person that is first across the line, but actually, cross country meets aren't scored only based on who was first, but it's actually based on an interesting scoring formula where you've got multiple team members that are helping to add to your score and actually subtract from others' scores. So to me, it felt like the complexity of what we see with some of the federal grant scoring for different sections. All right. So we know we've got a very complex and competitive situation. Can you imagine if on that starting line, one, maybe two or three, if we were being generous for the starter, if the starter pointed to those individuals and said, "You over there in the navy jersey, and you in the red one, and oh, you over there, you in the yellow jersey, the three of you, you each get a head start. I'm going to let you go before I let everyone else take off for the race." Does that guarantee that those teams are going to win? No, because it's only part of what's about to transpire. But wow, does it increase their odds? So, what we're talking about with forecasting is trying to give ourselves a competitive advantage, something that will increase our odds for funding when we know that there are lots of other awesome, well trained, competitive folks who are going to be in the pool competing for those same dollars. All right, so we'll leave the running analogies to the side for now. Let's think about how we're going to find an agency and a specific opportunity that will be what you want a head start on. So, which agency, or perhaps agencies plural, are you thinking your organization wants to apply to? There is a long list of federal departments and agencies that you might be considering. If you could please, I would love if you have a specific agency, department, or maybe plural that you're already aware of or interested in. I'd love it if you could type it in the chat box for me. Understanding which agency or agencies, plural, but not the whole list, but which few you're watching helps you when you're looking at the tools here in just a little bit to do forecasting work so that you are cutting out the opportunities and I'll say it noise that's not relevant to the work you're considering. So we want to be able to use these fantastic free tools that the federal government has available to us, and we want to drop the results and not see the things that are not important to our work. So, all right, we've got HUD, so housing, we've got NIH, so health, DOE. I'm not sure if in that case, if you mean Department of Energy or Department of Education, but either way, helps us to see that we've got a wide range of agencies that you're interested in as a group today. So when we think about which agency, some of you might be saying, "Diane, I'm just not sure." Even if you feel like you are pretty sure, at least one of the agencies you want to look for, I do still think it's a good exercise to consider which policy goals would your organization and the work you want to focus on, which policy goals does your work align with? So let's see. So Yvonne put NIH. And so that to me indicates that Yvonne might be thinking about health related policy goals and how the proposed work might help achieve those policy goals. But there are more agencies related to health than only NIH. We have all of HRSA. We have under that, we have the CDC. We have SAMHSA thinking about substance abuse and mental health. We have multiple options for where we might look. But by narrowing it down to, at least in this theoretical idea, at least talking about health helps to remove the other agencies when we're working in tools and trying to minimize our search results. But just thinking about the policy that we might align with might not help us to understand where we are going to be the best fit. So, something that is helpful is to understand where the federal dollars are going. And this is information that changes from year to year. It looked very different pre COVID pandemic versus during the pandemic versus what it is now post pandemic. That's not a static pie chart. But what has continued to remain, I'd say, a consistent trend over the years is that a significant part of the pie of federal dollars that's going out to organizations such as your own, either tribal organizations or nonprofits, is the Department of Health and Human Services is really where there is a huge chunk of federal dollars that are going. Now, that doesn't mean that that is the place where you should absolutely focus your efforts. Might not be appropriate for what your work is that you want to do. But I also want to call out that part of why that is the case is that there are so many formula grants, so non competitive opportunities coming out of that department. So it does skew what it looks like in terms of the dollars. So we want to be sure that we're focusing on where are those competitive opportunities that we will get to apply for that are best for your organization. So, a little grant trivia, some fun information that I think is helpful to highlight that we want to focus on not just the broad organization, but also watch for articles about programs that are being funded, funding announcements from similar organizations. We want to pay attention to the type of projects being supported, the type of programs that exist. They might be operating under a different department or agency than we might expect or be watching. So, for example, if we were to think about Head Start, that falls under Health and Human Services, but we might have thought that felt like education. Or if we look at Department of Labor, a reintegration of ex offenders, we might feel like that actually belonged under Department of Justice. We see Energy Innovation Fund under HUD. But wait, isn't there a Department of Energy? So as we look at these different large departments at the federal level, understanding that the evolution of programs might put something under a department or agency that isn't what we expected. So when we're starting from the top of the hierarchy, the agency or department, we also still want to keep our eyes out just in our flow of work, again, as we're looking at partners or maybe kind of peer competitor organizations, we want to pay attention to the type of funding we're seeing discussed. And if we want to get into that, then don't assume what department it's in, but rather start to research that funding specifically and learn where it lives within the federal system. Now, if we were to really go deep into learning about the federal government and we said, okay, we want to forecast where will the funding be? Well, we could. I know some of you I saw getting fueled by coffee as well. I felt seen. I also saw some book readers, and I'm like, yes, also a bookworm here. Um, if we're thinking about how we really would understand what might come out, our deepest reading might be the budget of the US government. If you don't mind, let me know in the chat box. How many of you have read part of the formal annual budget for the US government before? Show of hands in the chat box, please. Y for yes, N for no. Have you ever taken time to read this monstrous document? Actually, by length standards, it's probably about the same as many federal funding and opportunity announcements or notice of funding availability. Over 100 pages. Um, but it's a lot. It's more than we want to digest because based on what you've said in the chat box, you're not all watching each and every one of these departments. They're not going to feel appropriate for your work and what they're trying to do for their policy goals with funding. So, if you were to, at the very highest level, say you want to understand what's happening, well, let's see. So, Marla had said HUD. So, in this case, based on our table of contents, yeah, Marla, I would say you'd head straight to page 59. Same for Beverly. If Yvonne was looking for NIH, well, I would head for the Department of Health and Human Services and I would see what's being talked about on page 49. Department of Energy, if that was the case for the DOE for Daryl, we'd flip to 43. Or if it was DOE for Department of Education, we'd go to 39. We're looking to read the specific section for where you are interested in that agency or department. And what we want to understand, now we only have to read a few pages of text. What we are focused on within our reading here is what's being called out for an increase, for a decrease, for an emphasis. That's helping us to understand what might funding programs look like. So while we don't have any specific details about when will it open and who will be eligible and what would be the floor or the ceiling for a specific opportunity, if you look at this last sentence on the Department of Justice screenshot here, it talks about a very well-known program for schools in particular, looking at the Stop School Violence programs. There was also money called out for active shooter training, for mental health collaboration, supporting state and local law enforcement. So we have a sense of where might there be some priorities. Over the years, we've seen a lot of conversation in like the Department of Health and Human Services. We've seen conversations about opioid funding pop up there. This isn't, again, giving us the specifics about, well, when am I going to apply? And how many people are they going to fund? We don't know that at this point, but the budget gives us broad strokes about what might be priorities. So it helps to put us in the right frame of mind. What might we expect in this next federal fiscal year? So from here, if we thought of this kind of like a 30,000-foot overview, it's time to think about the tools that are available to us to assist with our forecasting. To do that, we're going to use a tool. It's called SAM.gov. It's a System of Award Management. It previously had been referred to, for some of you that may have been in the field for a while, you might have seen it in previous years as CFDA. That was known as the Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance. So SAM.gov is where, yes, organizations are required to register in order to even be eligible to receive federal funding. So you may have heard about it for that reason as well. The reason we're here today, though, is not to worry about our registrations, but rather because the assistance listings that are present here, and there's a link that you could click on right now in the chat box. The reason that we're looking at SAM.gov today is these assistance listings. All sources of federal assistance are present within this system. And we can search to find out what has existed, what currently does exist, and there are then opportunities, programs that will tell us about what might happen. So as we consider how we will use SAM.gov, the first thing I would encourage you to do is to narrow your results. If you were to read all of the assistance listings, you'd be here for a long time. I'd like to introduce you to a rule. It's air quotes around rule, but it's a nice guide, and I call it the coffee cup rule. It's okay if you're not a coffee drinker. But the idea of the coffee cup rule, you could call it the beverage at the desk rule, is that you want to narrow your results in this tool so that you can read through your results before you want to get up for another cup of coffee or for another mug of tea, another can of seltzer, refilling the water bottle, whatever your choice might be. You want to be able to read your search results before it's time to focus on rehydration. To do that, sure, we could put in our eligibility type. So, what type of legal entity are we as an organization? We could filter it by location. We could filter it by keywords like health or education or housing. But my first recommendation is to filter it by the organization you're interested in. So, for what you typed in before, go ahead, filter it by, for example, like Marla and Beverly had picked, HUD. And let's only start to read the results that are within that agency. That's a great first way to narrow your results. And then you can start to layer on. Maybe now you'll add a keyword. Maybe now you'll add your eligibility entity type. But now at least you know that you're in the right sphere of focus for what makes sense for your organization's priority. From there, well, we're going to make a really big leap. We're going to assume that you put in your agency and you started to read. Maybe you decided you were going to read and you had 15 results, you were going to read all 15. Maybe you had 24, you read 24. So I'm going to assume that you layered on some search criteria to not read thousands, not even to read hundreds, but to read something that's in a few dozen, maybe even less. So the assumption I want to make is that we took the time to add those criteria and get down to one opportunity, maybe two or three, but we've got at least one that we're interested in reading. So as we think about our one opportunity, for example, today we're going to follow the Department of Justice and an opioid program that they have available. And so what you see on the screen is the assistance listings for the Comprehensive Opioid Stimulant and Substance Abuse Program. What you see on the assistance listing summary here, the white background, that third line says CFDA number 16.838. That number is a number that we can use. It's sort of like a calling number for a book if we were using like our card catalog in a library. This number will help us find the opportunity in any of the federal websites that we're going to look at as tools today. It's consistently used across them all. So I'm just acknowledging that it's there. We don't need to do anything with it right now. Regardless of which opportunity we're looking at, our assistance listing menu on the left-hand side is the same for every opportunity, for any department, for any funding opportunity. As we scroll down, the information is presented in slightly different ways. And part of why I like to use this opportunity when teaching forecasting is because, if you can believe it, I have been taking screenshots of this particular opportunity since 2018. I know, right? Like, Diane, that sounds like a lot of fun. It is. It is a lot of fun to follow some of these fun opportunities. So what we see is that in fiscal year 18, when this screenshot was taken out of the assistance listings, what was being shown is that this program from the Department of Justice in fiscal 17 had only had 11.743 million and was anticipated in the fiscal year that was taking place to increase to 145 million in award dollars. But then to come way back down to 20 million. Well, what would that tell us? It would say, wow, if I'm thinking about applying for this, this might be a good year. There's going to be more funding than ever for this opportunity. I might want to really focus on doing it now instead of next year when the funding is anticipated to go down. If I read a little bit further in my assistance listings, the accomplishment section tells us that for fiscal 17, for that 11.7 million, there were 142 applications and there were 27 funded grants. That's pretty tight competition, isn't it? So as a result, that fiscal 18, when the dollars were going way up, people knew, wow, it's a really competitive program. And so they didn't put in as many applications. They were dissuaded by their previous work and rejection. And so what happened is that even though the money was going way up in 18, only 112 organizations applied. So far less than the year before. But the federal government had way more money to award. And so nearly every single application was funded. Now they are looking forward to fiscal 19. And what was going to be expected was actually a significant increase in applications. All the way up, they were expecting about 180 applications, even though they thought the money was going to go down. And the reason is that once people hear, wow, almost everybody got funded through this program last year, word travels fast in the grant community. So more people than ever wanted to apply. Even if people didn't understand what a high percentage got funded, the publicity that comes from all the federal announcements from senators and congresspeople and the organizations that got the money, that publicity draws more people in to want to apply. So it's going to, as a lagging effect, we're going to see the number of applications go up. All right, so where is this story going? We're only partway there. As this money has continued, no surprise, if we look backward, now we know, unfortunately, the opioid crisis has not been addressed fully. Nope, we've got a lot of work still to do. And so we still continue to see a significant amount of federal money put towards opioid programs each and every year. And so an additional screenshot, now we're getting closer to today, we see how the funding is actually higher than it was even back in fiscal 18, and in fact, it continues to grow. The accomplishment section continues to give us really meaningful information about how many programs are being funded, what types of organizations, the court-based programs versus a law enforcement agency versus a community-based organization. We can start to understand the types of groups that have been getting this funding. Now, over time, this program, it's had a few different names. They've had some additional supportive programs. But again, going way back in my archive to the first screenshot I took then back in 2018, after the program had been open, had received applications, you could look at it in grants.gov. It was closed. At the time, if you see on the left-hand side here under opportunity status, at that time, it had nothing additional in there that was open, so nothing posted, and there were no forecasted opportunities that matched this very specific card catalog number, like I call it, our CFDA, that 16.838. But if you'd heard about the program, if you were interested in it and thinking, I wonder if this funding, which seems like a perfect fit for what we want to do, I wonder if it might open again. I wonder how we could get that competitive advantage, that head start, maybe if it opens again next year. That's a good position for you to be in. You currently are considering, how do I get that running head start? So we know at that moment it's closed. There's nothing forecasted. There's nothing currently posted. If we look in grants.gov, we can't download the last set of guidelines. It's no longer available out of grants.gov. But you know what is still available? That's right. Our web searching, whether it's Google or Bing or DuckDuck or Ecosia, search engine of your choice, you can always go Google or search. I shouldn't just say Google. You can go use any search engine and type in the funding program name and NOFA, Notice of Funding Availability, or RFP, Request for Proposal, and see if we can find the last PDF that was available. And that's exactly what would happen. So again, back in the archives to 2018, I was able to grab this RFP. It's closed, it's not open right now, but here were the rules for what it would take to apply and why would I want this particular set of guidelines. Well, if I was in 2019, I'd be like, oh, having last year's application gives me a good outline to use. Not that I'm going to start writing, but that I could start planning, thinking about what elements I might need, some of the key attachments that I might want to be ready for. What were the way, how was the application scored? How were we judged? Would we be competitive? So we're using it as a planning outline. So now, of course, today, 2024, I wouldn't want to use a request for proposal, an FOA, funding opportunity announcement. I wouldn't want to use one that was from 2018. That's not quite ancient history. But in the grant world, that is far too long ago to use it as a planning resource. So let's come towards a little more of a current day. And now we're going to be in grants.gov. So first we were in sam.gov with the assistance listings. Now we move into grants.gov, another free tool of the federal government, which is where we see all of the posted funding opportunities that we could apply for. As we look at grants.gov, there's an opportunity status, which is forecasted. What that means is not open yet, but anticipated to open, we'll say soon-ish. So if we look at this opportunity status section on the left-hand side, at the time of this old screenshot, there was 169 forecasted opportunities. That's compared to, at that moment in time, just over 2,200 posted opportunities. These numbers fluctuate from day to day, from year to year. At the time of this screenshot, what I did was not look at all of the opportunities, but rather say, well, what if I looked at forecasted and posted, and all I worried about was opioid? And I would get my list down to something that is much smaller, forecasted at 18, posted at 35. That may meet my coffee cup rule. Could I quickly read through these and see which am I interested in? I think we might be okay. That might work with our coffee cup rule. The other thing that we can consider, maybe it is that comprehensive opioid program that was so exciting to you in the assistance listings, or maybe it's a Department of Ed program you found, a SAMHSA opportunity, a housing counseling opportunity, whatever it might be that you found. If we go ahead and put in that catalog of federal domestic assistance number, the CFDA number we saw from sam.gov, if we carry that number into grants.gov and search only for that, limit our search to forecasted, posted, and closed, what we're going to find is a very short list of everything related to the program. So what I would love to have you do, I would ask you to go to grants.gov for me. So if you could go to grants.gov, and I'm going to give you some verbal directions on where I would ask you to go. I'm going to be doing it live with you from my own computer as well. So once you're on grants.gov, I'd ask you to click on the third item on that top menu bar. I'd like you to click on Search Grants. When you get to Search Grants, in the left-hand corner, we've got basic search criteria, and I would ask you to type in the CFDA number 16.838. And when you do that, and I'm going to type that number into the chat box for you as well, what I want you to see is what happens. The first thing that should happen for you when you type in CFDA 16.838 is it should say no results found. Could you let me know, please, in the chat box if anyone has managed to see that same message? No results found. Y for yes if you have managed to successfully get to that result in grants.gov. Awesome. Okay, some of you are already there. You're like, Diane, no results found. How is this helpful? Okay, good. Thank you, everybody. Keep letting me know if you've got to the no results found. We're at grants.gov. We're in search grants, and we've typed in the CFDA number 16.838. Samantha, you're right. You see the magic next button. So what I'd ask you to do, please, under opportunity status, is to click in front of closed. And what happens? We have 18 opportunities that have just shown up. All of them are funding opportunities that are directly part of the Comprehensive Opioid Stimulant and Substance Abuse Site-Based Program. Some of them are related to technical assistance. Some are related to some fellowship programs. Some are related to innovation grants that the Department of Justice has had. But all of these are related to that initial, way back in 2018, opioid abuse site-based program. Now, there is no worry if you did not go live to grants.gov. The reason that I like to have people try it is because we might have gone, "Oh, no search results. Why? I knew this was the right program." But by looking around at our options, the opportunity status is the most likely second place that you will click. We're looking for where are there opportunities. So the fact that it's not forecasted right now, literally where we are today on January 18th, the fact that this is not forecasted right now does not mean this program will not open in 2024. It's really likely that it will open in 2024. So for those of you that have joined me live in grants.gov, I have a specific sleuthing question for you. It's kind of like a complicated grant word problem. Based on what you can see on the screen, and I'm going to verbally articulate what we see on the screen in case you haven't joined us for this live exercise. But based on what we can see on the screen, this specific program has opened in May, has opened in April, has opened in February, has opened in May, has opened in April, and lastly, has opened in January. Based on those months when it opened, when the clock started ticking towards a deadline of approximately 60 days, sometimes a little less, during COVID, way more because they gave extensions, which month would you want to be ready if you were trying to think about getting a head start, making a decision we think we want to apply? Which month in the calendar would you want to feel prepared to work on an application by? So we've got a lot of options. Again, we saw May, April, February, May, April, January. So which month in the calendar year, go ahead and let me know in the chat box, which month might we want to be ready for? If we think about these open dates, what that means is that when they open in grants.gov, we're going to have on average 60 days to get the application done. We're going to have 100 people hours. When would we want to be ready? I heard a lot of April and May as I was reading off those different times it's been open. I heard of February and that one January. So for where we are now, gosh, it would have been nice if we'd been talking about this, in November, December. I see some of you suggesting end of year type months. If we'd been talking about it before the new year thinking about, is this a fit or not? That would have been nice. But for where we are today, we know it's not open right now. We know it's not forecasted right now. I would say we want to be talking as an organization and making some decisions. Do we want to apply? Maybe yes. Probably yes. Within the next 4 to 6 weeks. It may not open until March, April, or May. We don't know yet. But you know what? If we start talking about it now, vetting it through our approval process, whatever that might look like in your organization, we're giving ourselves a significant head start. Now, there's something else that I would encourage you to consider. You have just, if you went to grants.gov with us live, you have just created a search criteria. This may not mean this might not be the right search criteria for what you actually want for your organization. I get that. But if you had gone from sam.gov into grants.gov, I would want you to be logged in using your free individual account in grants.gov and saving your searches, subscribing to your searches so that you know if anything changes. Go ahead and subscribe to specific opportunities. That way, you don't suffer from what I call grant FOMO, the fear of missing out on grant opportunities. So when you're at grants.gov, please use that subscribe button so that you get email notifications when anything happens related to that CFDA number that you've searched or the particular keyword search criteria that you've set up and you're using. Please subscribe so that you don't miss any updates. In fact, does anyone already use the subscribe button in grants.gov? Is anybody already using that actively to keep on track of, keep on top of opportunities they're interested in? If so, let us know in the chat box. I'm going to throw some virtual gold stars your way. That button, I remember in particular the November update with grants.gov when that came out. It was like my birthday had come early. It was, what a win. It's my favorite enhancement grants.gov has ever made. It's really fantastic. Um, so that subscribe button will help you keep track of what you find that's forecasted. But if you can believe it, we've looked at two of the federal websites that help us find opportunities that might open that we want to watch, and then specifically start to track down some potential days and make sure we get email notifications if anything changes. What is the third site? This is going to put, these are like the trifecta of federal forecasting websites. The last site that I'd like for you to bookmark so that you have it and you can use it for your future forecasting is usaspending.gov. usaspending.gov is where we can look up past awards for the funding program that we are most interested in. usaspending.gov gives us more than just competitive grant awards. We could look up contracts. We could look at funding based on fiscal year. We could look at funding based on keyword. We can look at funding based on a specific geography and see what sort of funding has been coming into maybe our region, our county, our tri-county area, our zip code. But usaspending.gov, let's say, for example, we'll use that opioid program again. If that was really one of your favorite programs that you were most excited about potentially applying for in this next calendar year, I would recommend that you would come to usaspending.gov and look at who has been receiving that funding in the last few years. In particular, I would pay attention to your own local geography. You want to know if any of maybe your collaborative partners have received funding, or if perhaps no one in your entire state has received this funding. So we call that a funding desert. There has been no grant funding for that program made in this area. So usaspending.gov is where the past awardees can help us understand where has money been awarded, where might there still be a priority to fund, and also to make sure that we're not competing against our own partners, because that really that puts both of us in a poor light if we're competing directly against our partners without meaning to. Sometimes it would be better if we collaborated on an application instead. Now, I do see, going back to that comment about the subscription button on grants.gov, Jessica, where you're going to see that is when you're in specific opportunities, and you have to be logged in with your free personal account for that to become visible for you. So if you went to grants.gov and did not log in yet, it wouldn't be obvious to you. So you have to first log into your individual free account. And then when you are in Search Grants, you have to be within a specific opportunity, and then you'll see your subscribe button. Please let me know. You'll have my email when we're done. Happy to let you know other ways to test that out. There's also a fantastic Learn Grants section on the grants.gov website. If you've not used that before, that's a great way to learn how to navigate their different tools. They've got some free YouTube clips and some other support available there. So I shared with you I called it the trifecta, our 3 sites that we love. There is a fourth, but it is not quite as strong in terms of why we need it and how often we will use it. So instead, I might say that it's kind of like the cherry on top of an ice cream sundae. So if we're looking at the Federal Register, this is the daily journal of the United States government. It's sort of like the daily newspaper, right? But for federal government things. Has anyone read the Federal Register before? Let me know. You can raise your hand in the chat box, Y for yes, or you can use one of the reactions if you've had a chance to read this before. I'll be honest, it is not something I read every day, and I am not suggesting that you add this to the list of things that you have to do every day. But what I am suggesting is that if you subscribe to the Federal Register, it is free. Create an email filter, put them in a special folder within your inbox, and you're going to peruse it. We'll say once a week. And maybe that you actually filter like your grants.gov results into that same folder and you just check it all. Maybe it's Monday morning, maybe it's Friday afternoon, but develop a habit of checking this special inbox, special folder once a day, or once a week, I mean. What we would find in Federal Register. You've already in the tools narrowed what you read so that you only look at the agencies that are most important to you. It is the same idea with the Federal Register. You don't need to read the news blurbs, the updates, the requests for public comment, upcoming funding announcements about everything, just the department or agency that you are most interested in. Now, for an example of why reading the register sometimes, but not like promptly every day, is so important, sometimes there are really interesting nuggets that pop out in specific agencies. For example, going way back, if we could please, into April of 2020, so during the early months of the pandemic, the Federal Communications Commission put out a funding opportunity related to telehealth funding. So healthcare folks were all over this opportunity. And where did it come out? In the Federal Register. That was where folks who were really watching, that's where they learned about that funding opportunity first. So if you were getting the Federal Register, paying attention, maybe even what you do is, like, for example, telehealth or health was your focus. Maybe even what you do is do a control F, right? Search for a word within the register each time you read it. That would be how you would find some of these nuggets. So you may have gotten a head start before this made kind of the big news, the grant email publications. So we found opportunities that we liked. And we've decided as an organization, it went through our vetting process. We like it. We think we want to apply for it. We think we're ready to commit our 100 people hours. Then what? So then if we go back to our grant life cycle, this has all been part of that research element. And so what's next is to think about reaching out to the individual listed as the program manager or the grant contact and finding out if they're going to be in that role for an upcoming application. See if they'll answer any questions that you might have about last year's guidelines or what this year might look like. Find out if they know what the technical assistance process will be for once it opens, and find out what they're able to answer now. Many federal staff are able to answer more questions, more personalized questions, I should say, in particular, before an opportunity opens versus after. So reaching out to them now, even when it is not open, but after you've done your homework and you're reading about the opportunity, is highly recommended to give you deeper understanding of whether or not you're really a fit. Now, those different sites that we've been on, that have been in the chat box, I've had them on the screen in a few spots. I did put them in one particular slide for you as well. So we just went through that hands-on grants.gov exercise. And this is optional homework for you. Some of you joined me live. I know others didn't have the opportunity. It's optional homework. There's no way that I can ask you to turn in said homework. But if you want to, you can follow up with me using my contact information that's at the end of the session. If you go to grants.gov and play around with the different criteria, play around with eligibility, play around with the eligibility type, the opportunity status. What I'd love to hear from you with is your optional homework results. Were you able to find one opportunity, or maybe two, that you think your organization might be interested in 2024? I don't want it to be something that is open now. But I want to know, using the combination of SAM.gov maybe and grants.gov, were you able to find something that you're interested in applying for in the future? If so, go ahead, drop me a line, let me know what you found and what sort of supporting resources you did. Uh, some sleuthing. It's sort of like, if you remember, or maybe you've reading them now or you've seen them recently, but any like the Where's Waldo books, right? We're looking for just the perfect thing for us. And so it's going to take a little bit of sleuthing, some trial and error. So if you have any questions while trying that optional homework exercise, by all means, please do reach out. So then I wanted to help you take that idea of forecasting at the highest, biggest level, thinking about forecasting federal grants, right? Those are the biggest dollars. They're the largest usually in terms of the amount of effort it will take for us to write them. But the same idea applies to state grants. We want to take that same concept, and I'm going to show you a few different ideas. I'm going to show you two different states quickly just to show you how different it is across states. But you can apply the same concept to state funding in order to take some of that stress off the process of these large government grants. So in New York State, there's been a system called Grants Gateway. And that's been the portal where folks could watch for opportunities, watch for a forecasted opportunity, and what they would call it is anticipated to open. And you could read through, and they have information that goes way back. The system started in 2014. So you can still see some opportunities, true story, that are anticipated from years ago, but never opened. So what I wanted to highlight is a truism for federal and state forecasts. There will be times when forecasted opportunities are placed into a grant system or published by a department or agency at the federal or state level, and they don't actually open. It's rare, but it does happen. And the reason it happens, something changed with where money was supposed to be versus where it could go. But forecasts are not always taken down when they fall through. So it is rare, but it does happen at all the levels. That's something that has been published as anticipated, talked about on a website, talked about in a budget plan. It may not come to fruition. So I do want to acknowledge that that is a risk when we're looking at forecasting. But for the most part, if something is formally forecasted in one of these tools we've looked at, especially grants.gov, It is very likely to open, although it may open later than what the site said. So it might just be a few weeks, maybe even just a day or two, but it may be behind what they anticipated for when it would open. Now, in New York State, one of the websites that you can look at is their openbudget.ny.gov site. And part of why I call out the specific site and use New York as an example is because we can see, and I know it, there's their coding on the side is teeny tiny font, but they've got different color coding for the different areas where they're spending state funding. And so education and arts is that dark blue, that big bar at the bottom. And then health is that like the maize gold color that we see there. Mental hygiene is called out as a separate category. That's more the that indigo blue. And we see that the bars in particular, I'm going to focus on health for a minute here. There's some variation. Right? It seems like it went down a little bit for at least what was being spent in 2021. We've seen it go up then, 22, 23, anticipated to go up in 24. The governor of New York has made a heavy focus of funding in mental health space, behavioral health space. So we see that that indigo blue bar is getting a little bit bigger for each of the years. And so how does that help us to think about where might we apply for funding? So paying attention to what's in the budget and the different ways that the trends in the state are heading makes it so that when we're looking at what has been funded before, we could ask questions of our elected officials. This is a spot where that relationship element of our grant life cycle is so important. Regardless of what state you're in, I'm using New York as an example, but regardless of what state you're in, the elected officials, so either state elected officials or your federal representatives, are a tremendous, tremendous resource in terms of forecasting. And you can ask questions about here's what I'm thinking about. I'm seeing this with trends. Do you have any knowledge of when a new program might open or what a contact that we could talk to at the department or agency? We strongly recommend those connections. You don't need to have a lobbyist in order to ask these questions and have access to staff at the state level or the federal level that could help you. Now, each state is very different with what their systems are. So I also grabbed a few screenshots from Ohio just to show you how different the information can look. I could have picked Colorado. I was talking about that one the other day with an organization, and what they're faced with, whereas New York had a consolidated portal. Similar to what happens in Ohio, is that you are looking at unique, specific departments and agencies. There wasn't a consolidated single place. And I know from looking at when you were checking in, letting us know where you're joining from, wide geographic representation today. So, what I encourage you, optional homework number 2, again, nothing you can turn in. There's no Google Classroom. I'm not going to check up with you on these homework items, but I encourage you to look at your specific state's grant system, the different agency or agencies, plural, that just like at the federal level, you think might be the best fit. Make sure you're subscribed to opportunities. Make sure that you have reached out to elected officials and tried to make connections. Uh, Try to understand how the spending in your state is going up or down or holding steady for the work that you want to focus on. This one's probably a lot bigger homework assignment than the grants.gov homework assignments that I gave you for finding an opportunity that's forecasted. That relationship building one, I get it. That takes a long time, might have to involve other individuals in your organization. Let's do the shorter term one. In the next 30 days, I'd like to have you look at your state websites. Make sure you understand which department website it is that you're going to keep bookmarked, subscribe to, and watch most closely so that you can keep an eye on the most relevant funding opportunities for your organization. Now, this, going back to our running analogy, when we talk about forecasting, we talked about it for federal, we looked at it quickly for state. But then what? Well, we really want to carry this same idea to also support our work in foundation grants. In fact, for foundation grants, I think the forecasting can actually be a little bit easier for us to predict and to follow than some of the government timing, which shifts so frequently. So, if we're thinking about forecasting, think about the largest foundation that you're aware of, the one that maybe your organization always says you want to get support from. One example, this is a foundation that was created by the sale of an insurance company, and then their proceeds from the sale became a foundation. And that foundation is called the Mother Cabrini Health Foundation. They make many grants each and every year, and they're sizable grants. They're not making $5,000, $10,000 grants. They're making $100,000, $300,000 grants, sometimes $1 million grant to an organization. So this is commonly on the let's get them to fund us list for a lot of organizations dealing with health anywhere in New York State. The research that we can do about funding opportunities for foundations lets us know, well, what type of work are they funding and what size are those grants? And that's really helpful to say, oh, I think that this might be a good fit for us. We also want funding for health, and oh, six-figure grants? Sure, right? What's not to like about that? We could also look at our list of recent grantees for that funder and see where are they and what type of projects are they funding. I know this list, it actually is a whole lot longer, right? This is a 6-page document. So I just gave you a screenshot of a teeny tiny part of it. But we can look at the recent grantees to get a sense of the type of organizations and the type of work they're funding. And what that does is it confirms for us, oh, this would be a good fit. And we really want to be competitive. Well, then what? What we're trying to figure out is where on our calendar would we place it? Now, unlike our example that we saw in Grants.gov for that opioid program, where we saw the program opening everywhere from January through May over the years, foundations tend to operate in a much stronger cyclical way, and their deadlines are almost to the day the same from one year to the next. So in the case of the Mother Cabrini Foundation, without fail, it will usually, it'll ask for a letter of inquiry. You could set your watch somewhere between mid-April and the first week of May. A 2 to 3 week window, yeah, that's pretty consistent, I'd say, in terms of what you're planning for. And then if you're invited, you can pretty much set your watch by mid to late June, maybe right around the 4th of July holiday, but you're pretty much going to be on the same timeline for that full proposal if you were invited. So this is something that you could get a nice head start on, not by writing, but by confirming, going through that vetting process as an organization, do we want to apply or not? So the reason I highlight that forecasting, which is pretty complex and requires a lot of different tools and websites at the federal level, the same concept should be used for state grants, for foundation grants, to help take some of that deadline-driven pressure and stress off of your organization. Planning for grants is possible, and it does statistically increase your competitiveness. But here's the common question. Here's what comes next, right? Okay, so I found the grant and yep, we vetted that we want to do it. But like what really should I get ready? What is it that is appropriate for me to take as steps beyond saying we're pretty sure we want to apply if this opens? So I thought I'd walk you through what are some of the recommended steps. And we're at a pretty high level here for what that will look like. What is it that we want to pay attention to? So we're going to start by thinking about how we draft information. None of this is final. We want to think about what sort of information could we frame out to, again, give ourselves a head start if we were those cross-country runners standing on the line ready to start our race? This is not information that is complete. It is not the information we will submit. You might even want to put watermark features. You might want to put the draft behind your text. It's giving us a jumping off point. We have our head start drafted. So let me walk you through the steps. The first thing I recommend, if an organization has found something that they are interested in, something that they think this is a great fit. And so for sake of example and consistency, we're going to use that opioid program. Uh, you looked at all that information in SAM.gov, grants.gov, and you thought, wow, it could open any day now. Might be more like March or April, but I think we're going to go for it. So we vetted it. We said it as an organization. We think we might want to pursue this. My first real step after we do that is to draft a logic model. Now, I know that not everyone loves logic models. It's all right, no judgment. It was a developed taste for me professionally over the years. What I would love to know, though, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1, brand new, just learning about logic models. 10, I love logic models. Could you let me know in the chat box your comfort level with developing a program logic model? So a logic model it's a blueprint of your program design. Uh, you could consider it to be an 8.5 by 11 of visual representation of the key elements of your program design. The 7 things that are commonly in logic models are listed here on the screen. Actually, we could say 8 too. I've got 2 different representations here because sometimes we'll put in our target population that we're going to work with. But the idea behind the logic model is not that um, we need to have lots of text and details laid out, but we're putting in at a high level what sort of things do we need? People, equipment, supplies, space. That's input and resources. We're trying to understand the key activities, the things we will do as part of the program. The training we'll offer, the meals we'll create and deliver, um, those are our key activities. Our outputs are the things we can count. So the things that have happened as a result of the activities, the number of people that participated, the number of those meals that were provided. So we've got some different options for what we might count, but again, those are our outputs as a result of our activities. And then outcomes, what is the impact we're creating? The change in behavior, the change in knowledge. Oftentimes we'll see in logic models that those get broken out short term, intermediate, and long term. Uh, when we're thinking about our outcomes, the indicators that we might see present are those are indicators for our success. What are the things that we're going to measure to know we were successful? Now, I did see that we got a request. Is there a link related to logic models? One of my favorites, and actually there's a lot of great resources, so I'm going to go one link higher than only their logic model information, is if you go to the WK Kellogg Foundation, just put the link in the chat box for you. Their resource section has a logic model development guide. It should be, I think it's the 4th thing down that you'll see on their featured resources page. I would strongly recommend that you take a look at that resource if logic models are new for you, if you're trying to understand and strengthen what that component would be. Developing a logic model is not a single person job usually. It is usually what I'd call a team sport. It's going to take multiple voices within the organization to lay out these key details about what the program or project is that you would put forward. If we get to the point where we have a draft logic model that we're agreeing this could be what it looks like. Again, it's not finalized. We'll have to adapt it once the opportunity, the application opens. If we have drafted that logic model and that opioid program or the program of your choice is not yet open, I would recommend that now you move on to drafting a budget. What does it cost to implement the program as you laid it out in the logic model. So maybe you listed that you need 10 staff. Well, how much is that going to cost? Or maybe you said you need 15 new computers for the computer lab and 4 staff. Maybe you said that you need $5,000 in supplies plus 15 staff plus, right? So you lay out your expenses, and what you're trying to do is find out, is the cost of our drafted program roughly, we're just trying to check ourselves here, is the cost appropriate for what we think might be available? So if we lay out what we believe to be our costs, and let's say for sake of example, we came out at 1.5 million for a year, but the federal funding program is only $375,000 a year. It's a pretty big gap between what we want to do and how much it will cost and what we think the federal government is going to have available per year for a grantee. You might say, well, then this is not going to be the opportunity for us, and you might move on, look for something different. Or you might say, oh, all right, so maybe I have to scale down my model. I want to have something closer that will fit within what we think the government is going to issue as an opportunity. So it's giving you the opportunity to double check yourself and think about what is going to be the best fit. Is this the right design? Do we think it's going to be right sized for the opportunity? Let's pretend you have a drafted budget. You don't need budget narrative. You don't need quotes. It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be pretty. It needs to be rough, back of the envelope type calculations that is helping you to check, is our project design the right size for what we anticipate for the funding? If that opportunity, our theoretical opioid or other opportunity, is not yet open, congratulations, you made it through step 3. Let's try step 4. Step 3, I mean, sorry, I promise I had coffee. So step 3 is work plan. The work plan is taking the activity section out of your logic model and giving more detail. So take each activity that you listed in your logic model and now figure out which staff person, which title that you just talked about in your budget is going to be the person responsible for that activity. And when do we think it's going to happen within the year that's being funded? What you'll find is that different federal agencies have different required formats or structures for their work plan. So if you have last year's guidelines and that's what you've been using as an outline, certainly go ahead and draft in that structure. It could be that it looks like what's on your screen right now. It could be that it looks like what's on the screen now instead. 2 very different work plan structures, both used as templates that were part of federal opportunities. To mix it up even more, SAMHSA does not give a work plan template, but requires that you build one of your own within your narrative application. You're going to build a table that contains specific information that they require. So what your work plan looks like at this stage is not important. What is important is that the activities that were in step 1 with your logic model have at a minimum an individual person, a title that matches with your budget, someone you're going to ask for money for. So who's going to lead this activity? And when do we think it's going to happen in the year? So, all right, maybe you've laid out 5 activities, 10 activities, 15. No judgment on how many you draft out. We're not trying to do day-to-day detail. We're doing key activities, so higher level. But we've got our work plan drafted. We feel like we've got a nice outline, a good start. We can double check that we've got the right key activities in place once the application guidelines formally open. But that running head start idea, we feel like we've got a pretty good sense of where we're headed. But we double check grants.gov again, and wow, that opportunity is still not open. But we made it through our logic model, we made it through our budget, we made it through our work plan. Are we done? Well, you might be. This might be the spot where now you kind of let it chill. You set it on ice and you let it sit and you think about it. And maybe you don't have to touch it again until it opens, but you just let it kind of sit and gel. Let's think about what it is. But for a few of you, you might take an extra step. If you know that you're going to have a collaborative opportunity, if in the guidelines that you were reading from the last year, if you see conversations about memorandums of understanding or agreement, letters of commitment from partners, you might do some pre work. So, for example, there's an Office of Violence Against Women funding opportunity that requires partnership. And in addition to requiring collaborative partnerships, they require that you have a legal memorandum of understanding that's put in place. And they have had a requirement in past years that each signature for the partners has to be on the same page. So you can't have like one page for partner one and one page for partner two. They want it all signed on the same page. Well, we're not signing legal documents before it's even open as an opportunity. That would be more than a head start. That's being presumptive. That's too much in advance. But knowing how long it takes for two or more organizations to create legal documents, to come to agreement, to make sure we've put it on board agendas, gotten the signatures approved, etc., we probably could lay some of those building blocks now to talk about process and timeline and what are those key details we need to know about. Well, when's your board meeting and how about yours? Or could the executive committee help with this? So we can ask some questions and put some structure in place to quickly move these legal things through so that we're not missing the opportunity to actually apply because they're not ready. But again, this step 4 is a maybe. For some of you, it'll depend on the opportunity. But that's it. That's what we're trying to achieve by forecasting. By finding the opportunity, we're taking the advantage of vetting opportunities in advance because the vetting process in just about any organization takes multiple days, if not weeks. So we're giving ourselves that time in the application process by vetting early. We're potentially setting the stage for us to get a head start on drafting some of those elements of our application, our logic model, our budget, and our work plan. Because then when it does open, we're ready to write so much faster. It doesn't decrease our 100 average hours. It elongates it in a way that takes the pressure off while the application's open, takes some of the stress off, and because you've got more thoughtful time to get things ready, is part of what will help make you more competitive. Now, I did put those links to our resources here again, so you had them in a few different ways. I want to call out that the file that's listed here in your tool, you can see that download. That's the PDF for the slides today. You're welcome to use that. Now, you've been fantastic interacting with me in the chat box during today and with our live exercise. Happy to entertain any questions that you have right now about forecasting. Please feel free to type those into the chat box if you'd like. You are also welcome to email me directly. These slides are all, as I said, you can download them all in the file section here within the web tool, and that'll give you the PDF to those different links. I'll go back real quick too, because the other option, I know sometimes I grab a quick photo of things, and that's how I remember things, especially if I'm in trainings. So if you want to, that would be another quick way to grab that resource information. But like I said, the full PDF of all our slides is in the files for you. And I'm taking a peek. Let's see. Questions about the content. Did I miss any in the chat box? I don't think so. But what I'm also going to do, in case I know sometimes it's easier to copy an email address out of a chat box. So you can also copy my email out of the chat box, put it on your calendar, put it in your contact information. Happy to have you reach out if you do that optional homework or if you have questions later. That's always there for you as well. Or you could connect on LinkedIn if you prefer. I know sometimes one more email is the last thing you want. So a direct message in LinkedIn is also fine if you want to reach out and ask questions that way. And yes, the session was recorded, and so that'll also be available as a resource afterwards. I don't see any other questions, and so I think we're all set. But like I said, please do be sure to reach out if you have any additional questions for me about the content that we covered today. Happy to answer at any time.
Thank you very much, Diane. You did a wonderful job. I'm going to go ahead and launch the survey for everyone. Just to give a little more details with the recording, it is recorded. It will be posted tomorrow, as Diane said. If anyone has any questions, I will talk about it just a little bit in a second. But this feedback survey is super important to Diane. It just lets her know what you guys like, what you would like to see in the future, anything that you would like her to give more detail on. She'd be more than happy to, and her email is in the chat, so please feel free to reach out to her if you have any questions. She is amazing. Our next webinar is going to be January 23rd. It is Federal Grants 201, How to Feel Confident as You Click Submit, presented by, once again, our Diane Leonard. As always, registration is free. It'll be at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Pacific, and 10 a.m. Alaska time. Like I mentioned earlier, this webinar recording is recorded, and you can find this recording and any other recordings on our website at www.nativelearningcenter.com. It is under the recorded webinar Kathita tab. If you are having a hard time finding a recorded webinar, please let me know, and I'd be more than happy to send you a direct link. You can access any of our recordings up to 2 years. Check out our upcoming events on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. We also have a podcast called Hope Being a Native American Podcast, and you can find that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Simplecast. Thank you, everyone, once again for joining us today. I greatly appreciate all of you for joining us, and thank you, Diane. You did an incredible job. I hope everyone can join us for Diane's next webinar on January 23rd, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.